my favorite websites when it comes to investing, dividendhistory.org. And I know the dividend stuff can be a bit confusing. There's a lot of jargon like ex-dividend date and all these things. And so this website is one of my best resources to find out information about dividends, how much it'll be in terms of the dollar amount, the percent, obviously as in the name, the history of like what has been paid out. And so if we pull up VCE and click on it here and we get some details, so we can see last updated yesterday, the last close price, the yield percent, and so this is the dollar amount of the dividend, I believe annually, divided by the last close price. Payout ratio, I don't know if I've ever seen that before. Populated, this is price to earnings ratio, market cap, and then this one's really important, frequency. And so to your question of, hey, I noticed I haven't been receiving a VC dividend, have they stopped? No, the reason is because it's paid out quarterly. So obviously the quarters are January, February, March, and then you'd receive the dividend in April, and then the second quarter, April, May, June, and then you'd receive the dividend in July. And so if we go down here, we'll see the history, and so we'll kind of walk through the different columns. We'll start here. So the ex-dividend date would be March 31st, the last day of the first quarter, and then the payout date, April 10th. So the ex-dividend date is essentially the cutoff date. And what that means is that they, on this date, essentially pull a report of every single person that owns shares. And this is the last date to buy. So I don't know exactly what time the cutoff is. And so if you were to purchase a share on March 31st, I believe you still would be included and receive the date. I don't know that 100% though. In any case, I rarely like to go right up against deadlines, and so if you did want to get this dividend, like make sure that I would just say buy it before this date to be on the safe side, which is generally my advice for most things, is just always have a buffer just in case. What if you plan to buy on this date and Wealthsimple's having an outage or something like that? So then you'd receive the payout date, so that's the date you'd actually receive the dividend, and then what is the amount? So it's 30, you would receive 37 cents per share that you have. And so this is obviously paid out quarterly, and so if you calculate how many shares you have, and then you calculate what your estimated cash out amount would be. In this case, because this is historically, you can see what the actual amount is, versus up here, it's unconfirmed estimated. This is the estimate. So you can kind of use this to estimate. And then you can see here that for this particular payout, it's 2.76% higher than the previous one. And so the reason that this fluctuates is because it just depends on which companies are being held in VCE. And it also depends on what the dividend payments are of all of those companies. And so companies change their dividend payouts quite frequently, I would say, actually. So if we were to pull up an individual company, I'm going to pull up TELUS. And we'll pull up the one that trades on the TSX in Canada. Oh, so here you can actually see payout ratio is displayed. So I guess that's only displayed for stocks. I don't actually have a definition of what that means. But here you can see the change. And so you can see here that they pay this out quarterly, and it looks like every second quarter they're raising it. And so they're paying out this for a little bit of time, and then they raise it by that much, and then they keep raising it. Usually when it comes to companies like this, like their board of directors would vote to raise the dividend. And then that's where you can go through this history and you can see that they've always raised their dividend, which would mean that if you purchased shares of TELUS, the dividend is always going to stay in line with inflation or exceed inflation. I mean, by this, if it's every quarter or every second quarter going up that much, you're exceeding inflation. But you can see over time, they've always raised. And actually, it looks like, according to this, they've never lowered their dividend. If you look at some other companies, we can pull up Ryocan. I'm assuming in 2020 that they would have lowered their dividend. Yeah. So, in 20. Okay, we'll go. Oh, actually, you know what? So they didn't actually lower it in 2020, which is interesting. But then the first month, so this is a monthly dividend, then they dropped it a third, which is pretty significant. Um, it's interesting that they didn't actually drop it during the initial hit of COVID. And otherwise, you can see that their dividend has stayed relatively the same, for an entire year. And so with TELUS, again, every 6 months they're raising it, whereas with RioCan, it looks like they went 2013 they raised it, and then they didn't raise it again until 2018. So and then it's such a small increase on top of that. To this though, so we would see this is the previous amount that was actually paid out. Then for June, I think that the reason the payout date is blank, I'm wondering if it's because of Canada Day and the market being closed, that they're not sure exactly which day it's going to fall on. I don't think I've actually ever seen a blank payout date, but they definitely are paying it out, especially because they have the ex-dividend date here. We can see that this is what the amount will be.